So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And inshallah, today we're going to be continuing our tafsir. And certainly the part that we were working on was still لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان. And we said that there were a lot of details in regarding this ayah, so we simply went to Tafsir al-Qurtubi. And in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, we got to the part إطعام عشرة مساكين, which, right, so it is showing me twice, but the sound, can you see the sound is okay on YouTube, Noura? And see that, yeah, so that's basically it. Okay, good. So when we were talking about the expiation part, if the person were to break their oath, what would be the expiation? The expiation would be al-kaffara. So that's what we're discussing right there, the kaffara of it'amu ashrati masakin. And we said we were going to kind of rush through all of this. So let's hope that we're capable of doing as much as we can in order to basically get, inshallah, to through all at least the different points that Al-Qurtubi wanted to say. So let's rush over them, inshallah. إطعام عشرة مساكين. So the expiation would be feeding 10 needy people, or of course, when it talked about feeding the 10 needy people, it said من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو كسوتهم. So that's the part that we wanted to get to. So when we're speaking about feeding 10 people, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that I have to literally give them and give those poor people those items? Or could I just invite them over? So that's the question that scholars actually had debated. So you had scholars like Shafi'i, they said, no, you would actually have to give them the money and they would be the ones to make use of the money. And basically, in other words, the ownership becomes theirs and not you basically determining, hey, this is what I want you to do with the money. All right. So at the end, of course, they basically used that as an evidence. أطعم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الجد السدس. They said, well, here's our evidence. The Prophet ﷺ, it was said that he had the word that was used was at'ama, which actually means, yes, literally it means to feed 1/6 for the grandmother, but we know that within the context that wasn't feeding, that was to actually mean that the ownership for the 1/6 of that inheritance was given to the grandmother. And since this is basically one of the types, in other words, we're talking about either feeding or dressing or clothing 10 people, then in that situation, you would have to consider that the transition of ownership, the ownership becomes basically under their power. As for, of course, Abu Hanifa basically said, well, if the person invited them, let's say the poor people, I guess, went to some restaurant, invited them to, I guess, a dinner and a supper, then that would be permissible. Let's see, and that's basically from al-Maliki as well, Ibn al-Majishun, and we talked about Ibn al-Majishun yesterday, and we said Ibn al-Majishun was basically the direct student for Imam Malik. And we also said that Ibn al-Majishun died 213 year Hijriya. So just some notes right there. And he said, Inna tamkina min al-ta'am it'am. Just to basically consider that as long as I'm inviting them over, that is, and these poor people, I'm inviting them over, could be to a restaurant, that's enough to consider that I am giving them the property and the ownership for that food. It doesn't have to be officially, here's the money. So just by giving them the money, the food, sorry, to eat, that in itself resembles giving them the ownership for the food. So regardless, of course, to Ibn al-Majishun, who's Maliki, he said regardless of how and what method is used to give them the food, at the end of the day, they have the full ownership for the food. Let's continue. Point number 22, من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم, which basically is this part of that ayah. من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم. So what does it mean من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم? So we know that in Surah Al-Baqarah, we went in some details and we talked about al-wasat to mean something in the middle. So we're talking about something in between two spots, and therefore al-wasat would be something in the middle, in between the two things, whether it's the upper to the lower or whether it's left to the right. At the end, it's basically the middle of something. In other words, we're speaking about not too extravagant in the amount that you would spend, but it's pretty much the average of what you would spend. And that's why Ibn Abbas had said, well, a person used to give their families a certain type of food, where it was probably like an upper class food, something that was extravagant. But then, of course, when he would sometimes give something that is probably, let's say, more economical. So in that situation, the ayah was in order to answer the question, to make sure that people are not going to give them probably, let's say, the most economical type of food, and certainly not the most expensive type of food, but it basically is within the average amount, the average spending that you would basically donate in terms of food. Now, let's continue when we're speaking about, well, what type of food. الإطعام عند مالك مد لكل واحد من المساكين. Well, what I want to say is that for that mud, is it so approximately almost half a kilo? We're speaking about well, no, it's hold on, let me just look at those numbers again. Sometimes I can confuse the numbers. Let's look at those numbers in order to make sure that I'm giving you the actual amounts. And hold on, let me give you right there. And inshallah, that would be, okay, here we go. So il-mud would be 5.875. So 5.8 grams. And il-mud in terms of, I guess, in terms of volume, it would be 607 mLs. Okay, so that would be il-mud. Okay, let's just look at it right there. I'm going to give you the numbers so you could actually see it right there. Okay, let's see. It's going to give you, I'm going to share the screen and help you see it. They did a really good job in pointing out those measurements. And they said, here we go. Let's look at that. Okay, here we go. So il-mud, here we go. So il-mud would be 1 ratal. So that's almost 3 kilograms, 675 grams. But in terms of volume, it would be 0.68 liters. Okay, so that's just, but of course there are differences of opinions in regards to those measurements, but I'm just here, pointing out at least the most common opinion. Okay, let's continue right there. So when we talk about il-mud, for every single poor person, we're speaking about adding those amounts. So during our times today, what would that look like? Not too fast. We're going to get there, inshallah. So Shafi'i had mentioned, and even let's look at Sulaiman ibn Yasar. Wait a minute. Who's even Sulaiman ibn Yasar? You're talking about Sulaiman ibn Yasar. And Sulaiman ibn Yasar is supposed to be let's go really quick and check out Sulaiman ibn Yasar. Okay, this person is really important to know about. Okay, let's see. So he is faqih. He is a scholar of fiqh. He's an imam. He's also one of the scholars in Medina. His nickname was Abu Ayyub. Some scholars said his nickname was Abu Abdul Rahman. But here's one key thing. He happened to be Mawla al-Mu'mineen Maymuna al-Hilaliyya. He happened to be the Mawla, the ex-slave for the Prophet ﷺ's wife. Did we hear that right? Yes. So Sulaiman ibn Yasar was the ex-slave for the Prophet ﷺ's wife. And he is the brother of Ata ibn Yasar. Okay, let's see. And it was told that he was also an ex-slave or mukatiban li Salama. He was born in Uthman bin Affan's Khilafah. So what does that mean? He was born in Khilafat Uthman bin Affan. That simply means he would be a tabi'i. He's not a sahabi. He's a tabi'i and not a sahabi. But just by the idea that he was the ex-slave for the Prophet ﷺ's wife, just imagine that one. Okay, let's continue. Sulaiman ibn Yasar, it was told that he was even more knowledgeable than Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib. Now, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, his own father, was a sahabi. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, that's not the name that he used to like. He used to like Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab. All right, let's see. So Sulaiman ibn Yasar, it was mentioned by many scholars that he was even more knowledgeable than Sa'id ibn Musayyib. So at the end, he was definitely one of those scholars that were known within Medina, And of course, we simply, just looking at that one, let's just look really quick at when did he die. So he died 107-year Hijrah. This is what I like about Wikipedia. It would give me approximate dates. Don't take those dates as certain dates, but they're approximate dates when he was born and when he had died, and not necessarily very certain. So don't never take Wikipedia as a reference. That's basically something that you would depend on. Okay, let's see. So Sulaiman ibn Yasar, and you want to keep in mind, he was the ex-slave for the Prophet's wife. He said, أدركت الناس وهم إذا أعطوا في كفارة اليمين أعطوا مدا من حطة بالمد الأصغر ورأوا ذلك مجزئا عنهم. He said, I was there when people, whenever they would give the expiation on behalf of a broken oath, then they would basically give the amount, which is 0.607 mLs, or we're speaking about, was it 508 grams of basically hinta, of wheat. And they used to consider that that was enough. Well, what about other things? What about other measurements? You know what? Does it have to be in a measurement? Or can we consider perhaps that amount? So I'm not here necessarily going to weigh everybody's plate. Can I just consider that, yes, it's a full meal? Yes, you can consider it's a full meal, and it doesn't necessarily have to be based on weight. Okay, let's see. Ibn al-Qasim, he basically said, well, it doesn't have to be يجزئه المد بكل مكان. So in other words, it doesn't have to be based on the weight, or at least the unit that was used in Medina. It could be based on the units that are used elsewhere. And let's just look at Ibn al-Qasim for a bit. Who's Ibn al-Qasim? Because he did actually appear a couple times, and I thought it would be good to talk about Ibn al-Qasim. And here it is. Let's look at Abdurrahman ibn al-Qasim. And who is that? So he's basically a scholar from Egypt. Okay, let's see. And he was also the friend of Imam Malik. When we say friend, we don't necessarily mean, friend someone that basically is for entertainment. But what they used to mean by a friend, they used to mean a person that was always there. In other words, they're the person that they would hang out with, the person that was accompanying that person for a long time. And of course, when we're looking at Ibn al-Majishun, so Ibn al-Majishun, and now we're talking about Abdul Rahman ibn al-Qasim, all right, that he was also considered one of those scholars that was at least in close relations with Imam Malik. He was also known في العبادة والسخاء والشجاعة والعلم والورع والزهد. Okay, so what does that mean? He was known for long hours of worship. He was known for his hospitality. He was known for his courage. He was known for his knowledge. He was known for his piety and religious integrity. And he was also known for his zuhd. What is a zuhd? Zuhd is asceticism, but not the definition of asceticism that we would see perhaps in Western asceticism, to mean that the person is somewhat, I guess, somewhat of giving up on dunya, like living a monk, but it's more that they don't really look for the money in this dunya because they're living for the akhirah. That's what a zahid is. So in other words, they used to say a different phrase for it. They used to say that the money is in their hands, not in their heart. They could be millionaires, but the money to them is not what they're concerned about, because to them, the real value is in the heart and not the value in the numbers. And of course, this is and of course, there's so much to say about Ibn al-Qasim, but I'm just going to make the story short. Let's see. He was born 32 و100, so 132 year Hijriya, and then he died on 90 و100, 190 Hijriya. Hold on, 132, 91 و100, 191. So how is it 59? Okay, so he only lived for 59 years. I thought they were saying 95. I flipped the actual numbers. Okay, so now we know that he died 191 year Hijriya. Okay, where was he? He was living in Egypt, but he had a direct relationship with Imam Malik. So now we're having two people that we talked about that had direct relationship with Imam Malik. Number one was Ibn al-Majishun, and number two was Ibn al-Qasim. Okay, let's see what Abu Hanifa had considered. So Abu Hanifa considered that it's enough to get نصف صاع من التمر والشعير. Okay, hold on. من البر نصف صاع, and ومن التمر والشعير صاعا. So what does that look like? So for Abu Hanifa, well, anyways, for Abu Hanifa, the amount, the weight amounts, let's look at that. Did we actually? Yes, here we go. So for al-Hanafi, anyways, is-sa' is, well, let's look at it right there. Is-sa' is 2,600 grams. That's a sa'. But he was saying that we're looking at half the weight. We're looking up for al-Maliki, for al-Hanafi, sorry. They basically said it is basically half this amount is going to be from al-burr. Al-burr is basically is wheat. Okay, al-burr is wheat. Versus, let's look at the other weights that he was saying. Versus, if the person was getting out, was basically donating barley or dates, then it would be basically the 2,600 grams. Okay, is that what we said earlier? Let me look at those numbers again. I actually forgot them. Right, so 2,600 grams if we're donating barley or tamir or dates according to the Hanafi madhab. Okay, let's continue right there. I'm just gonna scroll really quick because I promise that I won't stick too long and go, and cover each and every single point. Okay, let's see. Is it permissible to feed rich people? So here he said it's not permissible to feed rich people or someone that you are responsible for basically covering their expenses. But if you're not responsible for covering their expenses, and this person was poor, then that's the person that qualifies to take that that donation. All right, let's see. I'm just going to go really quick as much as I can that way. What if the person basically gave some food to someone that is rich, but he didn't really know that he was rich? He didn't appear rich. Would that be considered as qualified? Let's say you fed someone, you invited someone, and you didn't want to hurt their feelings and say, hey, this is because I had broken an oath, and right now I'm inviting you to this. But you just know that these people are poor and you invite them over. But later on, it turns out that that person wasn't actually poor. They had the money, but they preferred putting their money in savings than actually using it. Some people are just like that. They prefer not using the money and leaving that money for those, what they call them dark days, than actually spending them. Some people they can be cheap on themselves, or some people consider it money management. All right. So in that situation, does that mean I have to redo my expiation, or how does that work? So the first opinion in al-Mudawwana basically is telling you this is Maliki right there. In the first one, basically said لا يجزئ. Therefore, the person has to redo that particular expiation. In the second opinion, they said أنه يجزئ. So this is an asdiya right there. It's basically in a sharh, it's basically right there giving you another, I guess, opinion, narration for the madhab Maliki, that it would still be considered as that it was qualified. Why? Because the person didn't know that this person was not qualified as a poor person. Okay, so when we're speaking about feeding, what does that look like? Well, you would basically feed the person based on what you would feed. It doesn't have to be based on a certain unit, based on a certain weight, etc. But that's basically speaking about the minimum of it. Ibn al-Arabi, who's also Maliki, and he said, let's look at this. وقد زلت هنا جماعة من العلماء فقالوا إنه إذا كان يأكل الشعير ويأكل الناس البر فليخرج مما يأكل الناس، وهذا سهو بين، فإن المكفر إذا لم يستطع في خاصة نفسه إلا الشعير لم يكلف أن يعطي لغيره سواه، وقد قال صاعا من طعام صاعا من شعير، ففصل ذكرهما ليخرج كل أحد فرضه مما يأكل، وهذا مما لا خفاء فيه. What was he saying? He said some scholars, and I want you to look at the word zallat. What is a zalla? Is zalla when a person makes a slip or a mistake? Okay. But look at the adab that he was living. He said some scholars made a mistake and they slipped, and they said that if he himself was eating barley, and when we're looking at barley, many of you, I mean, alhamdulillah, that Rabbil Alameen is giving us, I guess, ni'am, blessings, that barley is not an easy thing to eat. Barley is, think of oats. Think of oats. It's very similar to oats. Okay, so it's very similar to oatmeal, but when you're going to crush it, if you're going to crush it and grind it, when you're eating bread made of barley, it basically is hard on the mouth. It's it's hard. It's not like eating bread. Okay, think of it as making oatmeal bread. It takes longer to grind, it takes longer to chew, and takes longer to even perhaps digest. So when you're looking at barley, one, it is cheaper. Two, the quality for barley is definitely way cheaper, and even the quality is not as good as wheat. Wheat is considered more extravagant. Definitely, wheat requires, I guess, better farming skills to grow. So that's why it's not cheaper. Okay. Barley, it doesn't require that much. It can even grow on its own if you basically just give it an area. Okay. So what Ibn al-Arabi was saying, if that some scholars that basically said if people were eating barley, then if you were eating barley and people were eating wheat, in other words, you were the poorest one, then what you have to basically feed people is what they usually eat and not what your average spending for food is. And he said that that's a mistake, because if the person was was not capable, in other words, couldn't afford to buy his own self and for himself, but barley, how is it that you're going to ask him to buy something that is not within his ability and financial ability to buy? If he couldn't even spend such kind of money on himself, then how are you asking him to do the expiation for something that he cannot afford? And he said, well, the Prophet ﷺ basically said, صاعًا min ta'am, that it would be, we're looking at, well, two-thirds, well, we're looking at an amount, a certain saw, we just said the numbers right there. I believe we said it was, am I right? 607 grams? Is that what we said? Of food, and or sa'an min sha'ir, or a sa' of barley. So therefore, we're not going to necessarily say that it has to be based on what they feed and not what you feed. Not to mention, he said, because the ayah was saying what you would feed yourself and not what people are eating. If they're not eating something like what we're eating, then it's going to be based on what the average of what you eat and not the average of what they eat. Let's see, what if the person, Malik said, if the person basically had given food for 10 needy people, and we're speaking about giving them, let's say, lunch for 10 people, and let's say dinner for 10 people, then that should suffice. But for his Shafi'i, he was actually rather more strict, and he said, no, it has to be all together, 10 people, because when you're going to be giving like one every single poor person, and then you're basically going to probably change the amount for people. So he was basically looking at, well, let's say Ali ibn Abi Talib had basically said, لا يجزئ طعام العشرة وجبة واحدة، يعني غداء دون عشاء أو عشاء دون غداء حتى يغديهم ويعشيهم. Ali ibn Abi Talib said it doesn't suffice to basically give uh, these 10 people just one meal, but you have to give them two meals. We're looking at a meal, probably lunch and dinner, or dinner and أو عشاء دون غداء, or dinner and of course يعني غداء دون عشاء أو عشاء دون غداء. So basically, you cannot give lunch and or dinner alone, but you have to give dinner and lunch. And therefore, you would basically have to provide two meals, not one meal. Okay, just mentioning that one. Okay, here's a rather different fatwa. Ibn Habib had basically said, well, you cannot give just plain bread, qafaran, like just plain bread. But you have to give, if you wanted to give the actual food, you have to give bread and something for them to basically dip in. So we're speaking about bread, we're speaking about something that comes with it, like a dip, or perhaps some kind of a stew, sauce, etc., but not necessarily just plain bread. And Ibn al-Arabi responded and he said, هذه زيادة ما أراها واجبة، أما أنه يستحب له أن يطعم مع الخبز السكر، نعم واللحم، وأما تعيين الإدام للطعام فلا سبيل إليه لأن اللفظ لا يتضمنه. Let's look at this word. And he said, to actually say that what you're supposed to be doing is giving that along with the bread, a certain sauce, maybe a hummus or a certain, I don't know, a certain dip that you're probably, I don't know, is cooking stew, lentils, I don't know, makhni, chicken, butter chicken, whatever it is, and or halim. It's all these different things. He said that doesn't have to be done. It doesn't have to be done that way. He said because we don't actually have a certain text that basically says that there has to be bread along with some kind of a dip or some kind of a side dish with it. He said there's nothing of that sort. So at the end, just I guess see when we're looking at what you normally would give yourself as a meal, just consider what do you usually eat? Do you usually eat, for example, bread or I don't know, a big, huge biryani, or what is the amount that you usually feed yourself? You want to consider these meals that you would give to these poor people. Okay. Let's continue right there. So when you're looking at, of course, the ayah, when it was revealed, certainly it was saying, min awsati ma tut'imun, basically looking at the average of what you eat. So are we talking about, hey, this requires bread, probably oil, probably vinegar. I don't know why vinegar. They used to actually speak about vinegar often. Kind of find it weird that they used to use vinegar so much, and they would even dip bread in vinegar. That's the last thing I would want to. Well, wait a minute, we do use vinegar in salads. So we would salad dressing, and they would put vinegar with it, olive oil, um, maybe some herbs and perhaps some lemon to make that. But we don't usually use a lot of vinegar during our times. I mean, it's just going to be 1 tablespoon to really make you a whole dish, probably. And in fact, not dish, but we're talking about a whole casserole, in fact. I don't know why I don't know why they used to use khal, and they used to consider that this was important within, I guess, their ingredients. Never thought about that, but now. Okay, let's see. وما كان في معناه من الجبن. You want to say something, Nora? Go ahead, dear.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so because here we have so many different cultures and stuff, and some people consider some food more valuable than other food. So if if we were going to donate, would that be based on that person's
Right. So that's what we're saying, Nora. What we're saying is that at the end of the day, you're basically going to consider what do you usually feed normally. We're talking about an average dish. We're not necessarily specifying. So that's what even Ibn al-Arabi wanted to say, that there's no evidence to specify what is supposed to be contained within the food, whether we're speaking about cheese or whether we're speaking about some kind of a meal containing probably dried maybe cheese or whatever it is. All of that specification what Ibn al-Arabi wanted to say, well, we don't even see such a specification within the text, and therefore that's more of a cultural thing than something that the text is saying. Did I answer the question, Noura?
Yeah, I think so, but I just thought, whose culture should you base that on? Because here in America, we have different cultures. Let's say someone is Arab and they want to donate to somebody who's Asian, but at the same time, they value different foods. You know what I mean?
Right. It doesn't have to be based on your culture.
Okay, so
So
based
if
on theirs.
right, it doesn't have to be based on
Okay,
your culture. So
jazakallah khair.
we're pretty much speaking about value, Noura. We're not talking about what type of foods you eat. So if you're Arab and you eat certain foods and you're donating to Malaysians, you're not going to donate your food because to them that doesn't taste good. So definitely to consider at least the value of what you would spend on your average meal, let's say it that way, that should suffice. And we're not necessarily speaking about what types of food, because that's what Ibn al-Arabi was trying to say, that all those different opinions that had mentioned using perhaps bread and a sauce next to it. I don't see Malaysians you eating bread very often. It's not that they don't eat bread, but you could see Pakistanis with the naan, Arab, definitely bread eaters. Well, not all Arab, but you could see, the variant cultures. If you were to give Malaysians, they would definitely want rice with chicken and, that's or probably something fish if you're talking about Terengganu, maybe that side of the town. That's the same thing. You want to consider, yes, the value and not necessarily what you would normally eat. So it doesn't have to be the type of foods that you would consume. But we're speaking about value. And we could see, even though it's not your culture, but you wouldn't find it hard to know that, okay, if I were to look at the ingredient, Malaysians, I don't say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see that they're big on goat meat. Somalis are big on goat meat. Malaysians are not. I do see that they like chicken, they like fish, but definitely not goat meat and not beef. I don't see that this is part of at least at least their, let's call it their average foods. But do I have to feed them as let's say I'm Somali, and to us Somalis, goat meat is what actually makes the real food. If it's not goat meat, that's not considered the actual respect that you would respect a relative, or you would respect an important person. So in that situation, do you necessarily have to give goat meat? If you're Somali, giving goat meat perhaps to a Malaysian who doesn't really consume goat meat, to them that doesn't taste good. So if you wanted to go and buy them chicken and the rice that they would eat, and probably a salad, or they like to eat the noodles, for example, that's an average meal. Average meal to them and average meal to you is quite different, but at the same time, we're talking about an average meal that is not too expensive and not too cheap. Did I answer that one, Noura?
Yeah. And what about so if you just would it have to be cooked, Yani? Could you just give it without being cooked?
So we're gonna get to
Sorry. Okay.
answering some of those
Okay, go ahead.
questions. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Point 28, he said it is not permissible to give the kafara, the expiation, for one needy person. And that's basically the opinion that Shafi'i had mentioned. And let's say the Hanafis, they considered that يمنعون صرف الجميع إلى واحد دفعة واحدة. And for the Hanafis, they considered that it is not permissible to give all let's say the amount of 10. Let's say we're talking about $200, okay? He considers that you can't give the $200, which would usually feed 10 people, and you just give it all together for just one person. But they do have differences of opinions if you basically had spent إذا صرف الجميع في يوم واحد بدفعات مختلفة. So basically gave, let's say he was supposed to give an average of $200, let's just say, roughly. Okay, so the average meal we're talking about, let's just say he said, well, the average meal is, let's say, $15. Then we're speaking about $15 for dinner and lunch. Then that situation, we're talking about, let's say, $30 per needy person per day. Then we're speaking about multiply it by 10. We're speaking about $300. Okay, so he said $300. Okay, can I basically look right there and distribute these $300 on different times? So I'm basically giving, let's say, maybe for 5 poor people in Malaysia, and I'm giving maybe 5 other poor people perhaps in Africa. Well, the people in Malaysia are definitely going to be spending higher spending on their food compared to Africa. So if you're feeding 5 needy people in Africa, the amount probably you might spend $20 on 5 needy people, and that should suffice. Can I do that? So that would, versus if I were to feed 5 needy people in Malaysia, I would probably need, give or take, maybe 300 ringgit. So we're talking about what, $70 right there? Though that actually added up to 70 plus 20. That would actually add it to 90. So what did I do? Did I make my calculation fair? You see what I'm talking about here? Can we do that and kind of like, I don't know, play around with the money? But my average meal is costing about $300. But somehow I managed to, hey, I guess, play around with the money, feed 5 people in Africa, and that was also only costing me like $20. And I fed 5 people for $70 in Malaysia, and that costed me almost $90. And I did it 10 needy people. There we go. Voila. I just did the math. And can we actually do that? So some scholars had considered that that's permissible as long as you're feeding 10 people. Other scholars, they considered that no, you cannot do that because you're looking at making sure that you're distributing based on what your average meal is, not based on their average meal, and playing around with all of that. So, we're just looking at differences of opinions. And some scholars, they said, no, it's as long as you're feeding 10 needy people, whether these people are in Africa or whether these people are in Malaysia or something probably even richer like Singapore, then in that situation, that's all that matters. Okay, let's continue right there. What if, this is the second opinion, لا يمنع من الذي دفعت إليه أولا فإن اسم المسكين يتناوله. Said as long as this person is a miskin, it doesn't matter who you're paying it to first and basically where they're at, that doesn't matter. And can I necessarily pay for this person at different intervals? So we're paying this needy person, let's say Monday, and then on Tuesday, I'm giving them a dinner and a lunch on Monday, dinner and lunch on Tuesday, and then of course making it 10 days in total. Is that permissible? instead of giving them for 10 needy people, I'm basically feeding the same person 10 for 10 consecutive days or non-consecutive days, basically 10 days. Okay, so for the Madhab Hanafi, they said that's permissible. It does the job. And the ayah basically said you're feeding 10 needy people. Well, it doesn't have to be 10 separate people. That's what al-Madhab Hanafi wanted to say. It doesn't have to be 10 separate people. It just means 10 needy people. And if you gave that needy person, well, 10 times, for al-Madhab al-Hanafi, they said that should suffice. Because it's all about what you would feed and not necessarily how many people, and that they have to be different people. All right, let's see. And of course, for the Maliki, they said, well, our evidence, the evidence that we're going to use, is that it said 10 needy people, then therefore we cannot go off and go off the literal wording that it was talking about 10 needy people. And what is intended is that we would support the group of the Muslims for one day and not necessarily start distributing that off for just one person, giving them a day and a second day. It's quite interesting. I mean, you could say, what was the reason that he considered? He said, well, the whole idea is to give these people the chance to be there to do the worship for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that would be, I guess, the expiation for what he himself had committed, and basically that he's allowing the space and giving the space for 10 needy people in order for them to do their ibadah. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to go really quick. I'm going to jump right there. Sorry, I'm right there. Okay. أو كسوتهم, or giving them الكسوة. There are two qira'as. There's al-kuswa and there's al-kiswa. Is there a difference between the meaning? No, there's no difference between the meaning. It basically means clothing. Okay, so al-kiswa, whether we're speaking about clothing for men or women, at the end, it basically what covers the body. So what does that mean? What type of clothing? We're speaking about clothes that would cover basically one garment that would cover, let's say a man, okay, and it would cover all his body. As for the woman, the least that would cover a woman is dir'a and khimar. What is a dir'a? A dir'a would be kind of like a abaya, and the khimar would be a hijab, the hijab. So where did you get that from? They said, well, that's the least of what would cover them for salah. Okay, exactly, both valid points. So they said, well, we're talking about what would make as a garment. What about the young children? So Ibn al-Qasim, remember Ibn al-Qasim, the Egyptian scholar who died 213 year Hijriya, he said, well, whether we're speaking about young or old, we would basically take in consideration that it's a garment that's covering their whole body. Does that mean their whole body, like let's say a hat, a coat, and probably maybe a skirt or something, or can that be something that, no, it could be less? Are we talking about something that basically covers on a winter? Or are we talking about something that covers on a summer? What are we looking at? Of course, two different things. And we're talking about name brands. What are we looking at? So at the end of the day, the least, here's a Shafi'i explaining that what would be considered as a garment, that's enough to basically buy, or at least give the money for them to buy. And therefore, it should be covering the body. And the least of what would cover the body is basically what would cover for salah. Okay, so does that have to be something that is a particular thing based on their culture, etc.? No, that's basically letting them decide what they would want from the clothes. Okay, well, they could probably want something, maybe in a name brand, an expensive name brand. No, they don't determine the name brand. You can just buy the clothes and just give it to them, okay? And give it to them, and they would basically wear the clothes. If they want to sell them, and probably decide that that's a better deal for them. That's their choice, and they can do that. But how much of spending do I spend on clothes? So an amount that would buy 10, let's say, clothes, or let's say clothes for 10 people. That's basically what it is. Clothes for 10 people. And you want to also consider that it is also the average of what you would buy. So if you're somebody that only buys name brands, well, it is part of an adab that you would also buy from these name brands. It's basically average of what you would buy and basically donate that. But if we're talking about, for example, quality clothes, of course, the quality that you would buy from Walmart is not at all similar to the quality of clothes that you would probably buy maybe at perhaps give me a place, maybe J.C. Penney. Okay, it's not the same. Sears or whatever the companies are. All right. Then in that situation, you would consider what name brands do you normally buy from, and what is the average. And then, of course, then you're going to consider a garment that covers that person, whether it's a man or a woman. You're going to consider 10 people. So let's look at this one. Is it enough to, let's say, get a imama, a turban? Well, now people don't wear turbans, but is it enough to get something probably covering the head? Maybe, I guess, a North Face hat. It's going to cover really well. Hey, the North Face hat, it can actually be really expensive. It can be $200 and $300, and you can get a North Face hat for probably $14 and $15 if you get it on sale. Okay. So yes, you can get something that is, those kind of rabbit fur and all of that. It could be really, really expensive. Okay. Can you actually get that? You can get that, but of course you want to take in consideration that some scholars had differences of opinions on the amount that you're spending. It's not just talking about the amount, but it's talking about the covering. Okay. How much should you cover? And just, keeping that in mind. So if, hey, you wanted to get something that is probably, I don't know, a North Face hat, and because these people are living in cold areas, and that would be something that would keep them warm, and it's basically considered an extravagant thing, and you wanted to get 10 hats, I guess, for these 10 needy people, and that's what the society needed, then in that situation, that would suffice. But again, you want to take in consideration people's needs, and definitely want to take in consideration the average cost, and want to take in consideration the ayah as well. Let's see, Ibn al-Arabi. وما كان أحرصني على أن يقال إنه لا يجوز إلا كسوة تستر عن أذى الحر والبرد، كما أن عليه طعاما يشبعه من الجوع، فأقول به. وأما القول بمئزر واحد فلا أدريه، والله يفتح لي ولكم في المعرفة بحونه. What is he saying? So Ibn al-Arabi was saying, he was really considerate, I guess. How is it that he said, well, he's basically objecting, إنه لا يجزئ إلا كسوة تستر عن أذى الحر والبرد. Said it wouldn't be considered enough to get a covering unless it's a covering that would cover the person, whether from the heat of the sun, or whether the cold. It's exactly like when you're talking about food, you're getting food enough to a person that would basically suffice from the person being hungry. So he's basically wanting to say the whole idea is the object for clothes is basically to give and provide warmth, to provide covering, but to say that you're probably buying them a pair of socks. Okay, and say that I bought 10 pair of socks, here it is, here's your kiswa. What Ibn al-Arabi was saying, he said, as for giving them one outfit or one garment, and we're speaking about perhaps a part of a garment, like giving them 10 mittens or 10 gloves or 10 socks or 10 hats, he said, I don't see how this would actually be considered as giving kiswa. But والله يفتح لي ولكم في المعرفة بعونه. But he said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us knowledge in how somebody could see that by giving one piece of garment, that would actually suffice and be considered as a complete outfit. Said, how is it that this is a complete outfit? So it's basically saying that this can't be a complete outfit unless it is basically considering. So here we go. This is him also I guess commenting on that, and he said, well, what we need to consider is basically the type of garment that they would be needing. So if we're talking about areas that are probably hot, we're going to consider that that what they're really needing is basically something that is probably giving them giving them, I guess, the necessary garment for hot weather. So if it's a hot weather, you definitely don't want to give them something that is probably polyester, or perhaps, I mean, yeah, African countries, they love polyester. I don't know why, but that's considered like that's what makes makes their cultural outfit. And you know, to us, that is like giving somebody plastic clothes. But to them, that's what they consider as extravagant because it's shiny. They would consider it as shiny. So you just want to consider, I guess, what is known and what is within that culture. Okay. Let's see right there. So some scholars, I'm just, I guess, letting you know the differences of opinions. Is it enough to give one garment? Is it enough to basically talk about a covering, a complete covering? How much of that garment is supposed to be enough? And is it enough to give two? Do you have to give two garments per person? What are we looking at? So are we looking at, for example, a shirt and probably pants? Are we talking about socks with it? Are we talking about perhaps a coat? In Malaysia, I barely see coats. I barely see coats. I just start wondering, like, when I went to those Twin Towers, they actually, I think I saw North Face and there were coats there, but I don't know who was buying those coats. But it was kind of surprising to actually see coats in Malaysia because it's hot throughout the year. But maybe it's when they travel to Canada, I guess, or Minnesota. Okay, let's continue right there. لا تجزئ القيمة عن الطعام والكسوة. This is a debate. This is a debate between scholars. Is it enough to give food, or can I just give the value? So it's probably easier to give just the value because I'll just give them, let's say, $300, and these $300, it's basically the average amount of what I would eat. And then I would just give them $300. And I know that this is a family of 10, so that we can get out of the differences of opinions on whether we can do, we have to have 10, literally 10 people, or how does it work? Okay, so can I just give $300? I'm going to donate it online to this organization that's sending money to Gaza or Syria or whatever country, and they'll basically, I guess, do the cooking, and I don't know, they'll do lentils, rice, and whatever it is, and they'll do all the job. I'll just put the $300 and donate it. So some scholars considered, like al-Hanafi madhab, they said that's fine. Just the value and donating the value is fine, and it doesn't have to be literally food. Okay. For Shafi'i, he considered that no, the ayah had specified and said it'am. It said it'am, and it gave the option of ta'am or clothes. So to give it in any other value, according to al-Madhhab al-Shafi'i, you're not applying the ayah. The ayah didn't say the value, but the ayah said feeding or clothing. But al-Madhhab al-Hanafi, they said no, it's enough to give the value, because in that situation, what al-Madhhab al-Hanafi considered that the ayah was saying and specifying food and clothes because that was what was necessary during their times in the Arabian Peninsula, because they lacked food and clothes, but it doesn't have to be the only thing to give. So let's see. And that's the same thing for Abu Hanifa. Well, تجزئ القيمة في الزكاة فكيف في الكفارة. So Abu Hanifa said the same thing, that even when you're giving zakah, he said you can just give the value. So therefore, let's say Ibn al-Arabi said وعمدته أن الغرض سد الخلة ورفع الحاجة فالقيمة تجزئ فيه. So what is the evidence and what is the stance that Abu Hanifa depended on? He said, well, the whole object is to basically cover the person's needs and uplift the need that a person's probably going through. And therefore, it's enough to use the value as the reference and give these needy people the money for them to determine they want to pay the bills with that money. That's up to them. So according to Abu Hanifa, it doesn't have to be literally feeding or clothing. If you gave them $300, they wanted to pay their rent with it, to them, that's what was necessary, because they probably had someone had already given them clothes, or when it comes to food, they managed to kind of probably consider maybe something cheaper, but to them, what is more important is probably having the money to be able to pay rent. Perhaps that was to them a better priority. Let's see right there. For Ibn al-Arabi, here al-Qurtubi is saying, well, if they were to say that it's all about covering the needs and expenses, well, where's the ibadah in this part? So what did he want to say? Well, for the Malikis, they objected to the Hanafis and said, you cannot give the value, because the whole idea that the ayah was saying, it'am, that you're supposed to be feeding or you're supposed to be clothing, he's saying, well, there is a specification in feeding or clothing. There's supposed to be some form of ibadah. There's a form of worship. And in worship, you don't necessarily have some kind of a logic behind it for you to understand. And we could see that the Quran was specifying 3 different means of how you could do the expiation. Then this is a worship, and this is not an issue of considering some logic behind it. Just like when you're praying 4 rak'at duhr, why 4 rak'at and not 3? Why not 6? Why not 7? Well, I had the capacity to do more. Can I just do more? But of course, with ibadat, with worship, we don't necessarily say, well, here's the logic behind it. Then therefore, based on that logic, let me interpret things differently. But we would basically consider that as tawqifi. What is the word tawqifi? Tawqifi means that this is what the Quran or what Islam or what the Prophet ﷺ Al-Wahy, basically, let's use the word that this is what it was saying. Therefore, we can't make our own interpretation and change it because this is what the text is saying. So this is basically the Maliki. And he said, وَالْإِنْتِقَالُ بِالْبَيَانِ مِنْ نَوْعٍ إِلَى نَوْعٍ. So here we go. He said, well, you know, when you could see that this is going from one type to another type to a third type to a fourth type, it's basically telling you that this is specifying what ways to pay the kafara in, to pay the expiation in, and therefore you cannot make up your own. That's what the Malikis wanted to say. Let's see. And Noura is saying, and shouldn't it be modesty, especially for women, because they wear the clothes outside the house? So, right. So, well, you know, we went into the details of what they considered in terms of clothes and all of that, and just taking, you know, this one is راعى قوم معهود الزي والكسوة المتعارفة. And I think this is actually making sense, taking consideration people's cultural clothes, people's way of dressing, and of course, the way that you would see perhaps the way that people would probably wear in mountainous areas are completely different than the way that people would probably dress in cold areas. Each area, their cultural clothes is basically to help with, I guess, meeting the terrains that they're living in, perhaps the environment, perhaps the different situations. And, you know, if the Africans were probably in colder areas, even those Africans would definitely wear something warmer. So you would go to Siberia, it's so cold there that they're all bundled up in all these clothes, and not any type of clothes, but they're actually wearing these types of furs that they would get from the moose and in those, I guess, reindeers, and they would dress like that versus the Africans. And we're talking about people that are primitive in Siberia, away from, you know, there are only 800 people almost on the population of Siberia, and it's a huge area, but there are only 800 people surviving in this, you know, we're talking about 80 below. 80 below. So you definitely need to be all bundled up. So we're speaking about kind of like the Eskimo, okay? And when we're speaking about the Africans, they would definitely cover at least, you know, just small amounts. And same thing when we're speaking about South Americans in the Amazon, they're barely wearing anything, if they are even. Okay. Just keeping that in mind. But of course, what we're going to consider, like you had said, Noura, is that we're modest, not what a Muslimah would wear in the house. So when we're speaking about modest, it doesn't have to be hijab. You don't have to wear a abaya and a hijab and all of that. We're speaking about a garment that would basically suffice to consider that this is an outfit for a man or a woman. So just keeping that one in mind. And I would say just considering the average. Okay. So we laid out the differences of opinion so you could see yourself what we're looking at and how the scholars basically debated all that. So stay on the safe side. Okay, 33. We're going to point 33. Oh dear, it's 1:30 already. إذا دفع الكسوة إلى ذمي أو الطعام لم يجزه. So what does that mean? Are we allowed to give the food or the clothing to somebody that is not Muslim? For the madhab Hanafi, yes, it doesn't matter if they're Muslim or not. Because as long as he's a needy person, then in that situation, that the comprehensiveness in that area would include them. So if I were to probably go to a homeless shelter and give enough food for 10 people, 2 times a day, 2 meals a day, for the madhab Hanafi, yes, it's a homeless shelter, and this homeless shelter has Muslims and non-Muslims in it, and perhaps majority are not Muslim, then in that situation, for the madhab Hanafi, that should suffice. Okay? And for the majority of the scholars, they said, no, you can't give for non-Muslims because this is a ibadah. This is a worship. And what did they also say? Well, they considered that the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was considering that for zakat, it's going to be for al-mu'mineen, then because this is an alternative, they considered that for those that considered that it should be only given to Muslims, they considered that there's something far beyond the expiation itself. There's another religious bond that is to be invested. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be donating to non-Muslims, okay? That's not what we're saying. We're saying, can an expiation or zakah be given to non-Muslims? Are they included? So for the scholars that saw that this donation goes far beyond the actual need for a needy person, they actually had seen that no, there is a specification, there is a farther intention or a farther wisdom behind the feeding or the clothing, and that it's building somewhat of a bond between you and the Muslim community, and it's creating a different bond in order to increase your iman. Because, or else, why did you break your oath? You broke your oath because you lacked piety. So to give you more piety, we need you to bond with needy people by clothing them, feeding them, or probably freeing a slave. And when we're speaking about religious bonding, we're speaking about, according to those scholars that said it, they have to be Muslim. They said you're right there making a religious bond in order to increase your iman. For the madhab Hanafi, they said it's not an issue of religious bond. It's an issue of you feeding needy people, and it's you that is giving the money, and you're just supposed to be just giving masakeen. Here it is. It said feeding 10 masakeen, or giving this hum, this pronoun hum, is basically talking about, well, giving them these masakeen, these this clothes, or these clothes, then in that situation, according to the madhab Hanafi, they said, well, the only restriction was that they were supposed to be masakeen. There's no other restriction. It just said that they were supposed to be needy people. It didn't say that they had to be Muslim. It didn't say that they had to be believers. It just said they're supposed to be 10 masakeen, and therefore, to the madhab Hanafi, to restrict it onto Muslims, they were considering, well, that's not what the ayah is saying. But for the other scholars, they said, indeed, it's saying masakeen, but remember, this is a worship and a religious bond, and that's why it was specifying these areas. Therefore, it's tawqifi. You cannot actually say that it can be given to somebody that is not Muslim when, of course, you recognize that there's supposed to be a religious relationship in here. Just wanted to, I guess, mention their points. Okay, so what do you think? All right, let's see. And of course, here, they all agreed, though, that you cannot give it to someone that had left Islam. Okay, what about a person that is a slave? For a slave, they said he's not a needy person because his master is the one that's supposed to cover his expenses. So therefore, you don't basically give a slave just because he's a slave. Unless this person was abused by his slave, that's a different story. Okay, so we're going to end right here, inshallah. We're doing really well because we're at point 34, and I believe there are 47 points. And alhamdulillah, we don't have a lot to cover, so that's very good. So inshallah we'll be finished soon. Let's see, what page are we on? Let me just, I guess, so that I won't forget, draw a big line right there so we could remember where we're at. Okay, let's see right there. Well, I didn't mean to draw that line. Any questions before I end right here, because I'm gonna be going somewhere. Any questions? No questions? Okay. So inshallah, next time we're going to be covering the rest. We go.
How many more?
How many more? Remember, it's 47 points.
What are we on now?
We're on 34.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. We're on 34. And the rest is going to go really quick, inshallah. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So that was pretty good. So I actually have to go. So sorry. So we'll continue tomorrow, inshallah. Hopefully, I'll be able to come tomorrow, inshallah. So this is it. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Uh-oh, what happened?